There's only a few attendees who are here early, but technically people will be able to hear what we're talking about. All this stuff will get trimmed out in the when we get the recording ready, but all in all,
Thank
that's
you for the
something to
reminder, Evan. We won't say anything too scandalous. We'll
or
save
we can
that
save
for
the
the
We'll keep
scandal
it,
for
yeah.
those who
yeah,
are
for the
here.
main show.
All right, I'll get the slides up in just one moment.
No worries.
How's everyone's Juneteenth going today?
Uh, I mean, mine's great because I've been hiking in old growth forest already and sitting in a nice foggy cabin getting work done. So pretty good. How about yours?
Lovely. I got some writing done myself today.
Oh, great.
I've
Hmm.
been pretty far behind in my own projects, but I'm slowly catching up.
That's good. I did some reading today, not so
Oh,
much the writing, though.
what are you reading right now?
I just finished Kaveh Akbar's chapbook, his very first
His
book.
first.
And
Oh,
you can just see there's so much of the martyr character in those
hmm.
early poems. Um,
Yeah.
it's really cool. It's
Oh,
a
that's
great
great.
chapbook. Highly recommend. It's called Portrait of the Alcoholic.
Mm, excellent. I haven't read it yet, but that sounds fantastic.
Yes. Yeah, I really enjoyed Martyr a lot.
Yeah.
Um, so it made me want to revisit. Okay, let me get, now that we have a new view, let me get myself set up.
And those
Um,
of y'all who are here early attendees, if you want to say a little hello in the chat box, tell us a bit about yourself. We got a few questions. Let us know who you are, where you're at, and maybe something you're researching yourself. What's the rabbit hole you're in?
yes, I'm excited to hear what people are researching. I've been spending a lot of time on Google Maps lately,
Oh,
doing the street view, which I just don't know what we did before that. I guess we
no.
just go to the locations, but
We'd go to the locations or we'd get a really good map or maybe we'd have a great librarian. But yeah, it's
yeah.
such a time saver. I was
Mhm.
on it yesterday on working on my new novel, and I was like, oh yeah, I can actually see how many buildings there are in this place that I'm trying to write about
Yes.
1,000 miles away.
hmm It's so great.
Mhm.
Isa, hi.
Hello, how are you?
Hello.
Welcome, welcome.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to start talking tonight.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to have you. I'm such a big fan.
Oh, thanks.
Yes, this is going to be great. Thank you for joining a bit early. We are live. We have some people trickling in.
Folks.
Um, but yeah, and we have some prompts here for people. Welcome, Nikki. Um,
Masons.
Freemasons in Austin back in the 1800s. Oh, that's so cool.
Wow.
Oh, cool. We have a chat too. Awesome. I love when there's a chat.
Yes, and we'll have a written Q&A also.
Yay.
Yes. Isa, how's your day been going? How's your Juneteenth?
It's been good. I had the day off on my day job, which was really nice. So I'm finishing up some revisions on the agent side of number 3. So we're almost ready to sub. So it's exciting.
That's
Yeah.
Exciting.
wow, that's
That's
incredible.
great.
Yeah, we got one last sort of brain blast for both my agent and I. He was like, "I had this idea." I was like, "Oh my God, I had this idea." So it was a perfect little confluence of sort of the last sprint to the end. But it's a fun stage of the process. This one has been kind of a molar tooth to pull, so I'm really glad that
Mm.
it's ended up nicely.
Yeah. Oh, that's like so exciting. We're planning an event, another third Thursday in August that'll be all about the writing the second novel.
Oh,
Nice.
And I realized as I was thinking about that that both you and Aaron here, this is your second books.
Yes.
Um,
yes.
yeah, so
Erin, did you work with the same editor twice in a row?
No, because actually one is a memoir and one is a novel. So I'm now
Nice.
writing my second novel, my third book. Two different editors, two different publication journeys, two different pub houses. So it's been really
Very
interesting.
nice.
But they've come out almost back to back, so it's been really a very interesting process
Yeah,
I feel
that's
like
really
you've been
fun.
on book tour for years
for
now.
like forever. When was I not? Was there a time before book tour? I don't remember.
Hello, Alejandra. Welcome.
Hello, how are you?
Good. How are you? So good to have you.
I'm so excited to be here.
Yes, we're live. We have people trickling in. We have some prompts that people are answering in the chat. But yeah, right now we're just kind of chit-chatting about how our day went. How was your day?
It's been great. Yeah, just hanging around at home, doing a little writing, doing a lot of reading.
Oh, that's awesome. That's great. What's everyone's writing to reading ratio? If you had to
That's a good question.
quantify.
Good question.
I think it depends. It ebbs and flows. There are some periods where I'm like 90% read, 10% write. And there are other times when I'm very heads down and can't really get any outside input except like movies and video games. But it's there's always a point where I'm just like, I want nothing but books. There's
Mhm.
reliably at some point in the year, there's a good stretch of books only.
Yeah, same here. It's how I start my day every day with other people's words.
Mhm.
Yeah.
There's another San Antonio. Hi, Catherine.
Researching twin dynamics. That's
Oh,
so interesting. I feel like there's so much to dig into there.
dystopian novel. That's great.
Yeah.
Feel like
I've just been watching
dystopian
the
is about
chat
to get very
come in with
popular.
everyone's research topics, and I've been just like mesmerized seeing the different like hyper specific rabbit holes people are in.
Uh,
Uranium mining on the Navajo Nation. That's fantastic.
Ooh, I want to read that one.
Yes, please.
mhm. This is awesome. I'm excited for hopefully we'll be able to help you all with these topics that you're researching, give you some ideas on how to dig into these things, how to take breaks, where to find info, all sorts of things we'll dig into. Isa, that was such a pretty glass you have.
Oh, thanks. We needed new ones. So these are blue and then there's some orange ones. I got them on a sample sale. I don't buy anything unless it's on a sample sale these days.
Nice. And Alejandra, remind me where you're joining us from this evening.
I'm in Chicago.
Wonderful, wonderful. How is it there?
It's,
Tempt us with the lovely weather.
I was going to say like it's very hot, but I feel weird complaining about that on a call with a bunch of Texans.
It's a different kind of heat. It's
Different.
different. It's
Yes.
different.
Yep.
But yeah,
Alejandra's,
I did a little bit of yard work and then I was like, oh, I'm good actually.
is that home, Alejandra?
Um, yes, this is where I live full time. I grew up in Texas in College Station actually, which is my Texas connection, but I've been in Chicago since 2019.
Amazing. I'm in Chicago also, usually.
Oh, amazing. Where are you now? I saw that you said something about like the island that you're
Yeah.
in.
I'm in Maine. I'm 12 miles off the coast into the Atlantic Ocean on a little island that I write about a lot. And so I've been coming here for, a couple of decades, but I'm in a I'm in a cottage that doesn't really have, we're solar operated. So the cottage is off grid and much of the island is off grid. And the last 2 days there's been a power outage here, which has been, so everyone's off grid. But it's really quite lovely.
Yeah, that's
No
Very cool.
cars. Yeah.
Sounds
Very quiet.
amazing.
Yeah.
I'm doing my first ever residency this December in Vermont,
Oh.
and only after I accepted realized December in Vermont. I'll,
Bundle.
I'll have no choice but to be writing. I'm kind
Yeah.
of nervous.
It'll be beautiful.
It will be. I'm hoping there's snow. Welcome, folks. We'll get started in just 1 minute, actually. But thank y'all for being here. Thank
Ooh,
you.
Morgan, I just saw your message in chat. I literally just finished like days ago. There's a new paperback. I think it was published a couple months back, or maybe a year ago now, since the paperback is out, but it's called Beta Vulgaris. And it's about a woman who goes to work at a beet harvest. And it's super trippy and weird. It's like eco horror, it's contemporary, but there's a lot of fixation on like food and the process of sugar and like how that impacts like eating and sort of the any kind of human impulse. So that might be it's fiction, but that might be an interesting one to read for you.
Oh, wow. What a great specific rec you had just kind of ready to go.
It's so
Mixed right
fresh
up.
in my brain, and it really latched onto me. So I'm still thinking about it, like having finished it a few days later. But it's very much about food, and it's very creepy and good. I loved it.
Okay, we are at 7. Evan, if you want to kick us off.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and get us rolling. I don't want to have us delay the conversation too much further. So, hello everyone. Welcome to the our third Thursday. Got a few announcements before we really kick things off. So, bear with me for a moment. So, first off, is that next Saturday? Is that right? Wow, June has really flown. We have our next Agent Symposium presentation. If you don't know, our Agent Symposium is our year-long program where we have 10 agents give a presentation each month about a different step along the process of publishing. And this month is between signing and submission, the agent-author relationship with Melissa Flashman of Janklow Nesbitt and Associates. Is going to be a great conversation or a great presentation all about what that relationship, how to build a good relationship between you and your future agent as you work towards submitting to an editor. It's going to be a really great topic, and I hope to see you there. Next up, I want to let you know that we are in the last phase of our spring 2025 classes and events catalog, and is our grand second chances sale. So every single class that we had available for sale in this spring is now available for a last chance moment of to get the recording and to see it. WLT members get access as a benefit to class recordings. So if you're a WLT member, sign in and have the whole suite of classes available at your fingertips instantly. It is buy two, get one free. There's a coupon. You'll find it easily on our website. So please, if there's a class you missed, if there's 3 classes you missed, pick them up. They're going to be really, really good. And you'll hear more about our classes coming up in August. But until then, we also have our summer writing retreat in July. This is a month-long program with 4 different tracks, one on memoir, revision, poetry, and fiction, along with write-in sessions, meetups, and craft presentations. It is a month long of writing-focused programming, so please dial in, get your writing done this summer, and join us on this journey. You can find more information on our website. And Sarah's dropping links in the chat box as well. Our manuscript contest, there's less than a month to enter. So 10 lucky people will get the chance to meet with the literary agent, and all the winners and finalists will be featured on what we call the Ink List. This is a really great contest that gives you a chance for early feedback on your work, a chance to get noticed by literary agents, and as you work along, the ink list will be passed around to the agencies in our circuit, and there's a chance an agent might reach out to you as a result of that. It has happened a few times after we've only introduced this 2 years ago, so our ink list is already incredibly exciting. It's a great thing to be on, and you can get on it by being a winner or finalist of this year's contest. So you'll learn more on our website and the link in the chat box. Next month, July, is our next third Thursday, remixes and reimaginings, seeing stories anew. This is going to be a really interesting conversation all about taking existing stories, myths, legends, and other such classics, and how they can be remixed into more modern stories told now, or different ways to examine the story. It's going to be a really cool topic, and I hope to see you there as well. So free RSVP, link is in the chat box. Um, also, hey, we're the Writers League of Texas. We're a nonprofit devoted to supporting Texas writers. If you don't currently support the Writers League of Texas, I consider you to either A, become a member, or if you already are a member, consider making a $5 donation. Donations go a long way in helping us maintain the level of programming we do, such as free events like this, our third Thursdays, and other free events we host around the state, as well as just all of the other wonderful programs we do, like Project Wise and Texas Writes. So please consider joining today or making a donation, and we would be eternally grateful. um, Finally, what's the best way to support writers? Buy their books. What's a great way to support independent bookstores? Buy books from them. We are partnered with Book People, a great independent bookstore here in Austin, to sell these wonderful writers' books, and you will be able to find a specific link to do so in the chat box right there. Please pick up their books. You're going to want to read everything they wrote about, see how they applied this amazing research they're going to talk about today into the novel. See the fruits of labor. So please consider picking up their books. Finally, I want to pass things off to my wonderful, wonderful program director, Sarah Renee Beach, to get us started in this conversation. Thank you, everyone.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome also to all of you joining us via our YouTube live stream. I'm Sarah Renee Beach. As Evan mentioned, I am the program director here at the Writers League of Texas. Tonight, we are talking about following the thread, well-researched writing. And before we dig in, I do want to acknowledge that today is Juneteenth, a particularly resonant holiday for those of us here in Texas. And while we won't be talking about Juneteenth today, we will be talking about projects rooted in history and facts and justice and the way information can be transformed into stories, both how to do that and why it's important. In addition to the books we'll be talking about tonight, another reading assignment I'll give all of you is Hanif Abdurraqib's profile of Opal Lee, one of the activists responsible for today being a federal holiday, which was published in Texas Monthly. I'll drop a link to it in the chat. There you have it. And it is a lovely and well-researched piece of writing. So that's just a little bit of homework for everyone. And now, without further ado, we're joined tonight by three writers whose recent books are incredibly well-researched, but not at the expense of both story and sentence level beauty. And I personally can't wait to learn from each of them. And so I'll introduce our panelists. Our first panelist is Isa Arsén. Isa is the author of Shoot the Moon and The Unbecoming of Margaret Wolf. She is a certified bleeding heart and audio engineer based in South Texas, where she lives with her spouse and a comically small dog. Welcome, Isa. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
We're also joined by Eiren Caffall. Eiren is a writer and musician. Her work on loss, oceans, and extinction has appeared in Orion, Writer's Digest, Guernica, the Los Angeles Review of Books, Literary Hub, Al Jazeera, The Rumpus, and the anthology Elementals, Volume 4, Fire. She received a 2023 Whiting Creative Nonfiction Grant, a Social Justice News Nexus Fellowship, and residencies at the Banff Center, Malay Colony, Hedgebrook, and Ragdale. Her books include her memoir, The Mourner's Bestiary, and her novel, All the Water in the World. Eiren, we are so jazzed to have you here tonight.
Delighted to be here. Thank you.
And Alejandra Oliva is an essayist, embroiderer, and translator. Her writing has been included in Best American Travel Writing 2020 and was honored with an Aspen Summer Words Emerging Writers Fellowship. Her book, Rivermouth, A Chronicle of Language, Faith, and Migration, was published by Astra House and received a Whiting Nonfiction Grant. She was the Yale Whitney Humanities Center Frank Visiting Fellow in spring 2022. Alejandra, thank you so much for being here tonight.
I'm so excited to be here.
So before we jump into our discussion, I want to let our audience know that we will be collecting your questions and we will dedicate some time to answering them towards the end of the program. So please do submit any and all questions you have for our panelists on tonight's topic. To do so, you'll navigate to your Zoom toolbar. Typically, it's at the bottom of your screen and you'll see Q&A. Click on that and you'll be able to submit your question, and that's where we'll find them towards the end of the program. Okay, so if we're using this metaphor of following the thread, which I love that you're an embroiderer, Alejandra, it felt very apt. If you were to unspool your projects to the beginning, what sparked the idea for your book? Isa, I'd love to start with you, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah, no, this is also a good starting point for it because the Margaret Wolf was a very different book before it got bought. I wrote it initially about a pair of opera singers. It was always about a husband and wife, and I knew like the relationship between the two main characters, Margaret and Wesley, has been the same since day one. But initially, I had them specifically going out to the inaugural season of the Santa Fe Opera, and it was very tied to that. And there was a whole thread that happened with the opening performance there. And it was a lot of, I have a lot of personal experience with that company. So that was that draw. And then when we pitched to my editor, she came to us very realistically and said, opera's a really hard sell. And I like these characters, but how can we, is there a way to preserve kind of the crux of these characters while still making it a little bit more accessible? And I completely understand. I have a music background. My bachelor's is in music composition, so I'm familiar with that world, but it's very siloed. And if you're not sort of predisposed to knowing it, it's tough to trust that you're going to enjoy something that involves that world. So we shifted it slightly and we changed them into Shakespearean actors. So we still got the high drama, we still got the stage, but all of that kind of initial spark of who are these people and what drives them. They were always married, they were always stage, and it was always 1950s because that was a very specific time period, not only for the first idea of the opera company, but then the conflict of, why are they hiding in one another? It would have to be a marriage of convenience. Why would they need a marriage of convenience? Oh, politically, there was a whole movement to accuse queer people of being communists, full bore, broad paint, broad strokes. So that was a very rich, conflict-full sort of basis to put them on. And from there, it was just a matter of looking back at my high school history texts and saying, what was happening in the 1950s, who was getting targeted, and then finding a way for those people to be happy and finding a way to carve out the communities that have always been there and have always, people have always found places to put their joy amid all of the strife. So it was kind of an exercise in rediscovering a lot of my own history too, and being able to see like, oh, the gray area has always been there, and the gray area of identity and attraction and personal connection has been a thing for a long time. We haven't always had the language that we have today for it.
Wow, that is incredible to hear that it was so different at the outset.
Yeah.
I have so many follow-up questions, but thank you so much. Eiren, let's hear from you. What about you? What was the initial spark that gave you the idea for All the Water in the World?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the initial spark really is quite old. The book itself is something I started over 13 years ago. So I was working mostly doing pretty well researched work in climate justice and looking at environmental collapse and ecological collapse, especially in the oceans. And I'm the daughter of an EPA scientist in Western Massachusetts. So I kind of came by my research, honestly, in that my mother would just send me stuff all the time that I was reading pretty constantly about the worst case scenarios of what could happen globally. And I'm originally from the Northeast. I was born in New York City, and I just kind of couldn't sleep. I had a young child, and I couldn't get out of my head the scenarios of what might happen. And at the time, I was going to the Field Museum a lot, because it was the special interest of my kid. And I just couldn't get this idea out of my head of what would happen to the museums after the full collapse of the glaciers and what would happen in a flooded world to places like New York City, which I knew really well. And so that was the initial spark, and I started writing from there. And it was a very, very long first draft. It was twice as long as the book is now, because I'd never written a novel. I was mostly a songwriter at the time, and a short essayist and a journalist. And so working in something that large, to me at the time was basically just like catnip, and it was permission to go down every single thing that I was fascinated by within the museum. There's a long portion of the book where they're on the Hudson River, and so I was able to buy a giant map of the Hudson River and how to canoe it in contemporary times and put that up against, some of the websites that let you flood the planet, with the levels of sea level rise. And so I had this like very rich inner life and a good excuse to write to people all the time while I was working on it and be like, you know what? How high is the Brooklyn Bridge? And how high is the George Washington Bridge? And who would, all of these little details, as well as like getting to look at pieces of archaeology and, entomology and things that were interesting to me anyway, and then just have the permission to throw them into this world that I'd created because I had scientists and curators at my fingertips who were already going to be working in these things that I got to then kind of throw myself at.
Oh, wow, so interesting. It sounds like both you and Isa, it started almost with story and then the research started to build it up. Alejandra, what about you? Tell us about the spark for Rivermouth.
Yeah, so back in, I would say that Rivermouth actually started with another book, which is Valerie Luiselli's Tell Me How It Ends, which I read in Spanish a little bit before it came out in the States and was immediately like, how do I do this? How do I do this thing that she's doing? How do I start translating and interpreting for immigrant kids, which is sort of the story that she outlines in her book. I was living in New York at the time. I ended up finding this place, the New Sanctuary Coalition, where once a week I would step into a pro se clinic with people who are filling out their own asylum applications. And I would sit with someone and I would help them like navigate this horrible little form that's like, what are the worst things that have happened to you? Why did you leave your country? Why are you scared to go back home? And so I did this for almost a year, and then I went like straight from there into my first year of divinity school. And in divinity school, I was doing a ton of reading. I was doing a bunch of like translation theory because that matters a lot when you're looking at like, which biblical translations are the right ones or whatever. And it was something that I was really interested in. I wasn't on the pastoral track, but I had a lot of classmates who were, and they were all thinking about like, how do we take care of people? How do we make spaces where people can feel safe? And so I realized that like I had been doing all of that basically already in the work that I had been doing. And as I was like writing assignments for class and stuff, I would be like, I want to like keep thinking about these experiences that I just had, which were really, really intense and really, really meaningful and personal. And so probably by the time that I finished my first year, like easily half of the essays that I had written like for class were on things that were kind of in conversation with each other and talking to each other. And then that summer, I was like, what if I just actually made them talk to each other? What if I actually made them in conversation? And so I spent that summer kind of doing that and working on that. And I think by the end of divinity school, I had like 150 pages of like still extremely messy, still extremely visibly like a bunch of essays super glued together, but also like maybe a book. And so that is where Rivermouth started.
Oh, wow. And Yeah, that's so interesting that it started out with these assignments. Translation really is the through line through the book, um, with these different sections. But as you sort of started envisioning as a book and doing research towards it as a book, how did it kind of change, or begin to take that shape that we see it in now?
Um, I think that I first started sending it to, or the first few readers that I had were professors and things like that. So they kind of knew the intellectual journey I had taken through grad school and could like follow my fairly insane, like starting here, going here, ending up here, because like they had been with me through that and they had like read all these essays before and were kind of like, yes, okay, we know. And then I started sending it to people outside of divinity school and they were like, what is happening? There are many things going on. And so um I think giving it that structure of three parts that it has now that are really geographically centered. So I have a section on the border wall, which is about my time in Tijuana. I have a section about tables, which is about my time in New York City, working with folks and eating with folks as we filled out asylum applications. And then I have a section on, or sorry, river, table, wall, which is about an immigration detention center that I visited and also immigration court and kind of the way that those carceral systems are involved in immigration. And so once I had those three sections, it was a lot more obvious where those gaps were and what kind of sit down and do it research I needed to do. And then I also got a job working at an immigration nonprofit. So a lot of my research was very, I don't want to say it was passive, but like I was learning a lot just by like going to work, talking to people, writing the press releases, reading the news that I read every day. And so it was a very method for research.
Mhm. Yeah, your endnotes are not giving passive. Um, thank you, thank you. And Isa, what about you? I'm especially interested to hear, like on second pass after
Mhm.
the changes, how doing that research, if it changed the shape at all, or yeah, I'm interested to hear.
I initially, when I was first, the first whack at it was kind of the way that my drafting works is it's like top layer only, make sure that the story kind of meets itself at the end. And then, okay, then we can dig into details. And it just the details deepen the more rounds I get around the story itself. So by the time we got to the point where my editor was saying, like, let's try something different with this, it was much more removed from New Mexico. I have a lot of history in the Southwest. I live in South Texas. My family's based in New Mexico. So that is a locale that I really enjoy writing about and I feel very comfortable writing in because it doesn't need a whole lot of research because I have so much personal experience with it. But now, suddenly, not suddenly, but by way of the changes that we made, only about a third of the book takes place in New Mexico now in the published version, and the other two-thirds take place in New York. It starts in New York, it goes to New Mexico, it goes back to New York. And I had to do a lot more research about New York. I had to make it feel like New York in the 1950s. I had to look up subway maps. I had to look up maps in general. I had to look up what kinds of restaurants were there. I had to look up street names. I made a couple puns on street names that I was very proud of about places that just don't exist anymore. So it was a lot of very physical research about like I know New York, I know New Mexico, but I only know them in my own lifetime. So what do I need to do to make them feel authentic as to, 70 years ago? So it was a really interesting exercise of like what stayed the same, what changed, what was there that isn't there anymore. Like New York used to be really seedy and I hesitate to say all of New York, but like all of the cool spots in New York, sort of like the Upper West Side and the Village and 42nd Street, like those were not safe places. So it was very interesting to paint in the descriptions of what it would have smelled like, what kinds of people would have been there, what kinds of businesses would have been open there. So it was a lot of, yeah, the way that I write characters, which I think is why I enjoy historical fiction so much, is that I really enjoy putting modern internal sentiments and like making very identifiable contemporary characters internally and then just shove them into some past time, because it's a very understandable, the way that I look at it, I think people have always been the same. I at least hope and think that who we are today, metaphysically, just what we like, what we need, what we want, nothing has really changed there, but the circumstances of society and our surrounding factors have changed very much. So it's a lot of fun to play with. Like, the internal world is very recognizable and familiar, but all of the surrounding circumstances are different. So how does that change? The main character, Margaret, is a very ambitious woman who kind of just wants to move on her own, and she has a lot of genderisms that kind of pop up along the way, and that's a very contemporary feeling. But she's also having to live this through the idea of, like, I want to be a wife, it's the 1950s, I want to support my husband, but I also want to have a job, and I want to enjoy my body and figure things out. And it was a very interesting exploration of, like, what would the sentiments have been like, and also kind of bleak in a way, bleak and inspiring at the same time, as, like, oh, a lot of this is very familiar today. Like, things are coming back around the bend in terms of societal sentiment of purity culture, and the way that people think of and relate to queer identities, and all of that was very interesting to read. Letters and articles and descriptions of, like, the handbook of this neighborhood, or finding a zine that was published in 1957 of, like, oh my God, people are still talking about the same stuff. But it's the slight differences in language were a really interesting discovery for me of, like, oh, we're saying the same thing, we're just all using different words.
Oh yes, fascinating. I definitely want to come back to where you found all these things.
Sure.
But yeah, it reminds me there, I saw something, because that Austin, our mantra is it was cooler when I first moved here.
Yeah.
And there was a newspaper article saying that sentiment in the 70s, which I just think is so funny. We are kind of saying the same stuff.
Time is a flat circle.
Yes. Eiren, what about you as you got those maps out and started flooding the world online? How did your book start to take shape as you were digging into the research?
I mean, I think my first pass, and because I was really learning how to write long form for the first time, I just let myself explore every single thing that I was interested in. And I filled the book full of all these details. And one of the things that was kind of a guiding principle for me was that my other hat is writing very well researched scientific communication that goes into memoir form. So if you read my other book, it is absolutely full of very detailed conversations with scientists and researchers and fishermen. And the research is really super important to me because I need to get the science right in order to communicate about the ecological crisis I'm tracking. And I took that same approach with writing this book. I did not, even though it is a world I'm making up, it's a world I'm positing that's going to be many decades in the future and sort of the very worst case scenario of the possibilities of climate change. I wanted it to be a book that was a novel that would be exciting enough to pick up for anyone who wasn't familiar with the science behind eco-collapse, but also that if somebody did pick it up who was a scientist, that they would not be completely taken out of it. I watch a lot of blockbuster movies with my mother growing up, and every time there was something like Dante's Peak where there was like very bad science around volcanoes, my mother was like on it. So it was super important to me that, especially because, I really respect the work that the activists and the climate scientists that I talk to on a daily basis for my nonfiction work. I respect their work so much, and I also think it's so important to have effective and realistic science communication, even when you're writing speculative fiction, that the world needs to have an internal logic. And while I can't claim that I got every single thing right, there's plenty of holes you could poke in my science because, again, I'm not a scientist, I'm a writer, but making sure that I had that detail right was super important. So it's a wonderful experience of being able to write this very long novel at the same time that I was beginning research on this heavily researched piece of creative nonfiction. And they were bleeding back and forth between each other. So when there was a science question, I was able to come at it from both sides. And then when it was something that was not specific to the world of science, when it was really specific to New York City or to the Hudson River, places that I hadn't actually been, I did what I thought I could do from the resources I could access in my own backyard, things I could get through librarians and things I could find online and the books I could order that would help me kind of orient myself to things. And I had some great resources, like my godfather is a former professor of city planning at St. John's and lives in Brooklyn. And so when I had a question like, would they portage over or under the George Washington Bridge if the sea level has gone this high, I could write to him. And if I wanted to know, like, there's an acacia tree in New York City in one of the botanic gardens, he would know somebody who would know, and I could get that information. And also, after I'd finished the full first draft, when I knew, I mean, nobody's going to buy 160,000 word book, right? There's just no chance. It is full of everything I love. I know it's going to have to get cut. I know that things that I adore, like my recipe for pemmican, is going to have to go, on the cutting room floor. But I could at that juncture do the thing that a lot of writers don't get the chance to do, which is I could go to New York City and I could try to weasel my way into the museum and make sure that if there was something that was an object that was being referred to in the book, it was there. Or if it was something that was being described in the library, that book was accessible, that resource was accessible. And that actually gave me a whole new level of understanding of the space I was writing about that I mostly remembered from being a kid and mostly investigated through maps I could get online of the museum. So, that kind of in-person stuff was super important. And getting it from that big, it's stuffed full of every detail you ever want about how they're going to make ink in this world, down to something that flowed and was fast and was enjoyable to read and correct, was many drafts worth of time and many conversations with lots of people much smarter than myself.
Oh, wow. Can you tell us a little? You've mentioned librarians a couple of times,
Mhm.
and I know we don't all have the connection of someone we can email those super specific questions, but we all have access to librarians.
Yeah.
So can you talk just a little bit like logistically about starting these conversations with experts,
Yeah.
about finding this information online, just like logistically, what does research look like for you?
Yeah, and I think it's really important to remember that, like, I'm working outside of the academy. I'm not attached to a university. I mean, I have a bachelor's degree. So I'm doing all of this research and all of this work just basically from the audacity of deciding that I can, and also from the beautiful fact that an American life means that you have access to brilliant experts who mostly are super delighted to get a weird email in the middle of their Wednesday that says, "Do you have the, phone book from 1927 for, the Upper West Side? Can I please get a hold of it?" And like that that fear of like, oh God, I'm not going to be able to ask anybody and I'm going to have to go and like paw through the card catalog myself. Like, yes, I do that, and I think we all do. But there's also, you can write to your local librarian in your own hometown, and if they don't know, they'll pass you on to the bigger cities. But also, like, there are email addresses available to you if you go on the New York Public Library website where you can just write to different divisions that might even have the very specific thing you're looking for. And so every time that I did that and I got to somebody, even if they didn't know what to do with me or my question, then they moved it on and on until I got to the right archive in the right part of the country. And I think that's an experience that everybody can have, even if you don't have the resources of the academy where you can like, just go to your on-campus librarian and ask them for things. And also, like, I was writing about the Museum of Natural History in New York. Like, my book is set on the roof of the American Museum of Natural History in New York. So I knew I wanted to get that right. And I also knew that the library of that building would be an incredibly important resource because, in a large part, my book is a love letter to the people who feel that it's their duty to preserve the entirety of human knowledge in the force of enormous collapse, right? I'm inspired by people in Leningrad and Ukraine and Iraq and, people who have not had the chance in Gaza to protect the materials that are under attack, whether it's from climate emergencies or war. And so it was super important to me to make sure that I connected with the librarians and the curators who would be willing to talk to me. And it's always surprises me, but shouldn't, that they want the question. They want the weirdo talking to them in the middle of the day. And every time that door opened, I felt like it just got opened a little bit more. Like, I was invited in to have conversations with the numbers of librarians at the American Museum of Natural History that just were responding to somebody who had, a few publications to my name and no real credentials. So I think we should think of that door as very open when we're starting, because every one of those things leads somewhere else.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you mentioned how excited these folks are to receive these emails. If you've ever talked to here in Austin, there's the Harry Ransom Center. anytime I'm there talking to an archivist, it's just sometimes you're having to inch away. It's amazing, but they're incredible resources. Alejandra, what about you? I know you got a lot of information from the work you were doing at the facility, but what about kind of other research logistically that you were doing, resources you were looking into?
Yeah, I feel like so much of my book, for better or worse, was a lot about breaking news. And so it was just kind of, for me, very much figuring out like who are the reporters on the immigration beat who are doing the work consistently, who are really covering the things that are interesting to me to read about within like this wider field of immigration. And I think also finding the writers and the academics who are doing that work as well. Because immigration is an issue that has obviously been going on like for since the United States started. And people have been thinking and theorizing about all of the ways that it is an incredibly racialized and incredibly messed up dynamic. And I didn't want to like come in and write my book and be like, breaking news, everyone, the immigration system is racist. I wanted to be able to be like, since the dawn of time, and here's all the academics who have said so, and kind of be able to talk about that a little bit more. So it was also, I'm really lucky in that the book that I was writing was something that a lot of different people were thinking about that same issue from a lot of different angles. And so I had a really solid like base of history and knowledge and other people that I could really like lean on and read from. I feel like John Washington's book on asylum, I mentioned Valeria Luiselli already, was just like hugely influential. On the translation side, I read everything from like Saint Jerome to like, oh my gosh, some of the like French guys who are like, translation is things that we do, like really like everything. And just getting to like read all of that and think through it was incredibly helpful. Sometimes I agreed, sometimes I disagreed, but I was able to like find my own way through it because all of these other people were also looking at the issue and thinking about it in their own ways.
Yes, yeah, that it resonates also because I mean the spark of your book was another book, and there's so much context in which you situate yourself so beautifully in your book, especially when it comes to you can tell how deep you went on the topic of translation. It was really incredible.
Thank you.
Um, Isa, what about you? Tell us like logistically what your research looked like. You mentioned finding some zines. Where did you find those? That sounds incredible.
JSTOR. I love JSTOR. I had it in college. Every university or the university that I went to in Temple. I went to Temple in Philadelphia, and as part of the student tuition, we got access to JSTOR, and I loved it. And my bachelor's is in composition, so I was looking up medieval manuscripts. I was looking up all of this really esoteric, fascinating stuff, and I was so attached to that as my process. So then when I graduated, I was like, my gift to myself broke with my first job. I'm getting a JSTOR subscription. So I have used JSTOR since I was in high school. And I was lucky to have a very thorough education in public high school as well. I had really good history teachers. Even as early as elementary school, I was taught what a primary source was. So I knew very early on that I was kind of primed to be curious about primary sources and look for direct sources first. I've been always predisposed to look for things direct from the person, look for letters. You mentioned the Ransom Center, and I was so excited because one of my favorite classicists is William Arrowsmith, and he taught at UT Austin for a number of years. So they have a lot of his papers there. So I've looked at things in his handwriting and had sort of like the oh my God moment, like sitting at the table, looking at your heroes on the page. And there's something very powerful about receiving information directly from the person who is either writing it or saying it, orators, zines and photographers and all of the things that come directly from the source. And in this day and age, I think particularly with regard to mid-century America, you really have to find sources that are devoted to telling the truth of the matter. because specifically in the 50s and 60s, as McCarthyism really, really latched on, the truth became something that people realized they could bend for political or social gain. So it becomes that much more important to find something that is speaking to the truth of the matter, or somebody's experience. I think what I have found most helpful for fiction is to find people who are living very similarly to that. And for factual nature, I think for Shoot the Moon, it was a lot of looking up the schematics and the floor plans of the Space Center before it was what it is today, when it was still the, oh my God, I'm blanking on it. I'm so sorry. Before it was called the Kennedy Space Center, it had a previous name, but things are different. Things change. So you can't always go with going to visit the thing. You sometimes have to look at what it was initially. So I really enjoy looking at old maps, and JSTOR is often my starting place for that. But usually too, a web search with very specific keywords will often get you to a free version of something. But don't use ChatGPT. Don't use AI. It's wrong. It often gets things wrong. But primary sources, I think, are often the best place to start, or that's where I find the most inspiration on my end.
I'm so glad you said that. And I want to say, I'm seeing some questions in the chat about JSTOR. It is a database, it's a research database. And to echo what Eiren said, if you want to know more about it, get in touch with the librarian, and they will just be so ecstatic to introduce you to JSTOR and teach you about it. And here in Austin, you get access to JSTOR with a library card. So you could get free access to JSTOR if you live here locally in Austin, and check your local library wherever you live. That could be the case.
I just want to
But
pop in and say you can
yeah.
also sometimes access a JSTOR membership if you go through your alumni association. So that's how I do it. I don't go through any of the main institutions in my town, but you can, for $25 a year, I get my JSTOR access, and I use it all the time for science papers as well as all this other stuff. And WorldCat also. If you start becoming an expert in using WorldCat, which is the World Catalog, you can be searching for a particular person and get to things like the archives that Isa was talking about, where you might see that somebody has all of their papers stored in a particular archive someplace, that you can begin to access through their library system. Sorry to pop in, but
No, thank you so much.
the hack of the Alumni Association was something that was given to me by another writer, and I was like, oh, I'm so here for this.
Yes, this is why we're here, to give each other these hacks. Yes, and this is a perfect segue into because once you get on JSTOR, once you get on WorldCat, how do you I mean, you can avoid rabbit holes, but do you have any particular advice about how you deal with kind of an unending rabbit hole? Or conversely, if you hit a dead end, how do you deal with that? Alejandra, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so I feel like the most recent thing that I researched like really, really deeply was an article I wrote about the translator for Simone Weil, who is a French mystic and theologian who is died during World War II. Her books were translated into English in the 50s, and her translator like has no trace on the internet. Like you look her up and the only place she shows up is in like translated by Emma Crawford, nowhere else. And so I was like, who is this person? And for years I would kind of like do another little Google search, do another little like JSTOR search. Newspapers.com is also like an insane resource that you like can type in a name or something and it'll just show you all of the different articles that this person's name has popped up in. And so, this was like a rabbit hole that I started on while I was working on the book because I kind of saw her and realized that she was a person for the first time and was like, oh, who is this person? And nothing came up. And I was like, okay. And I kept kind of coming back to it, and it turned into an article that I published in Commonweal, I think late last year. But I think sometimes rabbit holes are a thing that turns into something else, and that can be fruitful. There are other times where you're like, I cannot keep going down this for my own for the size and the scope of the book that I'm working on, this is no longer a productive rabbit hole, but like I'm gonna keep this bookmarked. And I think that there's also in that same way, through my research, I was able to, like, I was literally like knee deep in ancestry.com looking this woman up. I'm pretty sure I have her narrowed down to like a woman who was living in England around this time. Like, kind of a lot of the biographical details make sense. And there's not much more I can see. Like, I didn't find an archive or diaries or like even an obituary. And like, I think there's something really fruitful in that blankness too. And it is something, when there's a gap in the research like that, it means something. When there's a gap in the archive, it means something. And then you say, that's something else that you can write into and that you can explain and think about. I think particularly when you're working in nonfiction, you can like very clearly point and say, like, this is a hole that exists in our knowledge about the world. Like, what's up with that? And I think when you're doing fiction, you can like play in that space a little bit in a really fun way. But I think that's how I balance both the like, oh, whoa, too much and the but not enough, not ever enough
Mhm.
of researching.
Oh, that's so well said to write into the gaps. I'm excited to go read that article you wrote. That sounds fascinating. Isa, what about you? How do you deal with kind of unending rabbit holes or dead ends?
All of my best ideas have come from kind of letting things percolate. Quite honestly, I love rabbit holes. I think I love, Alejandra, that you mentioned to write into that space, because I think, particularly with historical fiction, there's both a responsibility and a freedom that the writer has to determine what of the true timeline are we going to use. I think there are some books that are very firmly alternative histories where it says this is what happened and I recognize that, but I'm choosing something different. Or books that say this is what happened and there's a lacuna here and I'm going to fill it with fiction. And I think that some of my favorite books exist in the space between those, where it's kind of this idea of this might have happened. It's everything on the supporting guardrails of it could potentially be real. It feels very tangibly possible. It feels authentic to the time period that you're reading into. And I learned a lot with my first book, which was set during the 60s in the space race. And there was a lot of shooting from the hip that I did with that one. It was my first book. It was the first run around the track. I did my best with the sources that I got, but definitely left some stuff on the cutting room floor there. But then with Margaret Wolf coming around, I knew where I felt most comfortable leaning into that empty space, and where I felt that I could really use that to bring more of the characters to life, and bring in more of this sort of what if this might have happened to the audience. And I find that a lot of that space ends up feeling really nice when you're able to draw it very closely to things that are happening today. It's things like the contemporary anxieties of self and being perceived, and the idea of the writing into the 50s was interesting because it was a very new dawn of feeling like people were watching you, and there was kind of this third eye of the government looking on you, or kind of the neighborhood, or the overwhelming society, or what was expected of you. Kind of got really codified post-war. There was a big push to make Americanism kind of a brand in and of itself. Um, and the spaces of the gaps between that, of people who chose or just simply didn't fit that to begin with, they still had to carry on in an authentic way with their own lives. So a lot of richness came out of that, and that's where I would look for letters that were sent between people in that time period who were very defiantly living their lives, either as transgender people, or living with queer relationships, either under the rug or very out with it. And a lot of them happened to be actors, which was nice for the book because that was the world that I was writing into. And there's fun to be had, I think, in kind of creating your own reality in that space of, you have in one hand your facts and your primary sources and your maps and your stuff, and of all of the things that kind of must be true for the audience to believe you and follow you into those spaces. And then on the other hand, you have your own personal experience of, here you are as a person in today, and how do you speak to the very human condition of we're all grappling with the same six problems, and how do we make that work in a fictional, compelling setting, and just keep mashing things together until it makes interesting sparks.
Oh, I love that image and the of the guardrails and just
Mhm.
the track. And there's so much play you can do with that. Can almost It's almost like a constraint you're working within, but then there's so much you can do within it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Erin, what about you? How do you deal with unending rabbit holes or dead ends in your research?
I mean, the thing about the way that I work, usually because I'm working on a nonfiction, a fiction book at the same time around similar subjects, I feel like that gives me the permission to go down whatever rabbit hole I want to for as long as I want to, and then just assume I'm going to need it for something. And that if I don't need it for something that ends up on the page, that I needed it to be able to understand the world that I'm writing about in more depth, even if it's an imaginary world. So, I think that map that I was talking about of the Hudson, it enabled me to spend time in places that I was never going to get to visit as I was writing. It also enabled me to remember places and to have feelings and to sort of think about what maple trees will be like in the world that I'm positing, whether they survive or they don't, and who's going to remember what they're like. And when I'm in conversation with people who are readers who've read the book, one of the best things that people can say to me is, "Oh, I grew up in the New Jersey Palisades, and you got it." And I've never set foot on the Palisades, right? This is all from research. And I think everything that didn't make it into the book that was something that was a beloved fact of like, I spent an enormous amount of time trying to figure out if there were going to be specific tools for navigation available to my characters by scavenging the library. Like, would they have a sextant? What kind of barometers were in the collections? Would they make their own? And how do you make your own barometer? And how do you teach somebody dead reckoning if they're on a roof and they're not in a boat? Like, I spent so much time. What ended up on the page was probably about 5 sentences all told in the whole book, but I knew what they would have done, and I trusted my characters to be able to have that certainty. And so I feel like that certainty, that reality of what that world felt like to me after understanding it so deeply is there. It's there in the book. It's there in the way that the book feels, and it's there in the fact that it's real to the reader, even if it's something that didn't it wasn't worth it to a certain extent because it wasn't there. The recipe for pemmican that I had to throw away actually ended up in a cookbook about service berries that just came out last week. So it wasn't wasted. But the other thing is that I think both Isa and Alejandra have done such a beautiful job of talking about this thing that I think we all confront when we're doing this long form work, which is that there's always going to be gaps in your information, in your knowledge. There's going to be those spaces that you're writing into. And I think one thing I tell my students all the time is that the audience isn't interested in your answer so much as they're interested in watching you ask the question. And I really think that that's true both for nonfiction and for fiction projects, having done both. I'm in the middle of researching something right now where I'm required to answer a couple of questions I want to answer to write to the government and ask about espionage. And I've been getting back these wonderful Glomar letters that are so, if people don't know what Glomar is, it's basically a letter that is sent to researchers as a form letter that's been sent out since I think, when was Glomar? It was like the 60s. Am I getting that right? Somebody smarter than me should remember. But it basically says we can neither confirm or deny that this information exists at the government level. And it's a way that you know that probably it does, and they're not going to tell you, but this is how they tell you that they're not going to tell you. And it's super cutesy. And like, it's very much this like researchers ask, and the government says, haha. So I don't know the answers that I want, and I'm not going to get them. And so I have to think about in that project that I'm working on, how do I approach that black hole at the center and talk around it? And I read really beautiful nonfiction writers who do that. And when I find it happening in fiction, I'm writing a new novel right now, and I find that I'm trying to write about a part of the country I've never really lived in, and that I feel like when I go to research it, it pushes me back out again as a person who's not of the place. And I spent a couple of weeks recently just feeling like, oh, how am I allowed to write about this region that isn't my region, that isn't my home? And then I realized, oh, the person I'm writing about is also being pushed out of the place, and it isn't hers. And writing into that question, writing into that alienation, writing into that separation became a whole avenue to discover things about her personality and her storyline that I didn't expect to find if I had, absolutely been an expert about it, that I wouldn't have found. So that question keeps me excited. And I think as a writer, when you admit that you are still in question and that you didn't actually get it answered, it earns the trust of your reader because we're all in that all the time in our lives. Certainty is not the idea. And so staying in that space with a reader is really, it's an act of generosity and connection.
Oh, that's so well said. And I'm so glad I've succeeded in putting together a panel of everyone who's pro rabbit hole. No rabbit hole shame here. It's beautiful the way you all explained how you kind of use that kind of the way that it is. It's an unending amount of information, and yet there is always going to be so much uncertainty and questions to write into. Thank you all so much for your responses to that. Um, I do, Eiren, want to ask you to elaborate on the recipe because you've brought it up twice now, and there was a question about it in the chat. So
Yes,
can you talk a
pemmican.
little bit what this is that you're talking about?
Pemmican is a historic but also contemporary type of travel food. It's basically just ground meat that's been preserved, so dried meat, mixed often with fat or dried berries or honey to make a sort of basically like a granola bar, but a meat granola bar. And it's very much a tradition within indigenous culture all across the United States. And again, as I was trying to create this imaginary world where we basically are like post-technology in a lot of ways, I assumed that I needed to think about what my characters were going to be eating on this long epic journey that they were going to go on. So I did a lot of research on portable travel foods and what people might be able to make in this world. And I got really interested in pemmican, so I had a number of different research recipes for them. And the one that I sent to this cookbook is a pemmican recipe that specifically uses service berries, which there's a beautiful new Robin Wall Kimmerer book called The Service Berry that everybody should absolutely go out and get immediately. But service berries themselves are really delicious, and they're kind of like a grape and a blueberry had a baby, and they grow wild all over the country, and they are in many of the public parks in Chicago because there's a real move to plant edible food in public parks. And so, yeah, meat granola bar is not the word that you want to use, but yeah, that's basically what it is.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. It's delightful. Um, so I want to get into kind of the nitty-gritty of organization. What tips do y'all have? What tools do you use to keep all of this information that you're amassing together? Alejandra, I'll start with you because you do have a beautiful endnote section at the end of your book. So tell us all your tips and tricks about staying organized as you research.
I would actually strongly suggest that you not do endnotes like I did, which is that I researched everything. I kind of kept track of what I was reading and where I was reading it, and then also didn't. And then like 6 months before publication, my publisher was like, "Hey, what like do you have endnotes? What's up with that?" And I was like, "Oh no." So a huge part of my copy editing process was also going through and like fact checking myself and tracking down sources for all of the things I said and making sure that I had page numbers for things and just like making sure that all the things that I thought, making sure that everything said what I thought it did and what I said it did in the book. So I would recommend not doing that. I would recommend keeping track of your sources as you read them. The way that I am doing it for book two, which I much more recommend, I have one notebook that I use for everything. I journal in it every day. I like my to-do list for the week are in there. It's everything. And as I am reading things, as I am noting things, particularly as I finish books, I will write myself notes in that, and then I actually keep a handwritten index in the back. I can show it. So I have like, you
Oh,
can kind of
wow.
see that. So it'll be like, this is what I'm reading, this is what I'm thinking about. And so I have this across a couple of different notebooks now. It's a lot easier for me to find things. And then for articles and things like that, I use Scrivener as a way to like kind of keep everything together and annotate it. And that's like a little bit more easily searchable. Yeah.
That's I'm shocked that it was an after the fact and notes, but you did
I
an incredible
really would
job.
not recommend
Yeah,
it. It was a bad time.
you're doing a beautiful job this time
I was also
around.
like making changes at the end, and my editor was like, You have to stop. You have to stop." And I was like, "No, but I was wrong." And he was like, "I you have to stop. Production editor is going to fly to Chicago and kill you." And I was like, "Yeah, okay."
That's amazing. And thank you for showing us your beautiful index. And that's incredible that you're doing that analog. But also, I'm glad you're using Scrivener too. It's an amazing tool. Isa, what about you? What tips and tricks do you have for us, tools that you're using?
I'm lucky in that with fiction, nobody expects you to keep a bibliography. Nobody sort of intends to turn to the back of the book and say, "Where did you get all of this information?" Because at the end of the day, it's fiction. Like we have a disclaimer at the beginning of every book that says none of this is real. But obviously, as Erin said, it's kind of an act of goodwill to do your due diligence and give your reader a realistic world for your story. So I keep the story running in the word processor that I use, and then I always keep a separate doc for every book manuscript, whether it finishes itself or not, whether it's kind of just an idea that needs to be blurted out and not done anything with, or if it makes it all the way done. I keep scrapbook docs where I start keeping records of who I want to put in my acknowledgments and like who I like where the libraries that I used, the resources that I used that were specifically like very in large volume helpful. I always want to make sure that those make it into the book in some way to give a nod to where I got the information from, who it came from, if it's sort of more esoteric. But I put all of the information. I make a Pinterest board, I make a playlist. I will start, if I see a meme that reminds me of the book, I'll put it in the scrapbook. If I come across a video on YouTube that is like, oh, this is a woodworker in Ireland who's using this old shipbuilding technique, I'll put it in a scrapbook. And if it's a, song lyrics or a hymn or something that I just come across out of total left field that even just kind of itches at the idea that has any kind of inkling to do with the book, I'll put it in there. Because it's really nice to have a place where when I'm stuck or when I'm not feeling so in love with the story and I sort of need to convince myself to fall back in love with it or, find some other thing that makes me excited to re-engage with it after a long while away, or if I've kind of hit a dry spot in the high burn of it, it's really handy to be able to go back in there and say like, oh, this thing spoke to me 2 weeks ago, or oh, this book that I thought might be something worth it is now coming up on my Libby list. So yes, I'll take it and I'll read it. And maybe it's you never know what's going to kickstart the engine. So I very much magpie everything. And it's the scrapbooks are fun to have when the book comes to the end of it to look back and say like, oh, I thought 6 months into the project, I thought this was going to be a really primary function of it, but either like fell completely out of it or ended up being something that was just a little like Erin, you said maybe 5 sentences, but there's a joy in it as the writer where no matter if it's a little piece of the book, if you can bring it full circle and get it in there, it's very satisfying. And it's really nice to have kind of the content to lean back on to be like, okay, yes, like it's a nice little preserved slice. It really is a scrapbook. It's a digital keeping place for all of the things that made me think of my book. And it's a cool memory thing to have. And it doubles as research in some ways.
That's amazing. I love the concept of a scrapbook, and how you can reference it and keep adding to it, and then it's this beautiful document at the end.
Yeah, and somebody in the chat said more about the format. It's literally just a doc. I start an empty doc and I name it the name, like working title or title, scrapbook, and I just start pasting stuff into it. And that's also in early days, if I don't really have a working draft, if it's still very early stage, kind of full-legged, I can go in there and just write and put ideas. If I start thinking of a scrap of dialogue or I start thinking of a scenario that I want to put in, I jump in there and I write it down. And then I know when I start up a session or I'm thinking, oh, what was that idea? I don't have to page and page and page through. I know it belongs to that book in that scrapbook and I can just look for it.
I love that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Erin, what about you? What tools are you using? What tips do you have for us
I
organization-wise?
mean, I'm also very messy, so I'm just going to say that I've tried to be a good little scholar and use Zotero, which is a really useful tool that you can keep running on your computer while you're doing research and literally just load a list of all of the links that you have accessed as you're researching. Zotero. It's just a little piece of record keeping. Because before I was using Zotero, sometimes I would create a spreadsheet and sometimes I would just create a Word doc where I would just say, all the research on whatever. And if I'm working on a nonfiction book, my memoir, The Mortuary is organized as a bestiary, which means that each chapter is a different animal. So I would have like a whole document that was like everything about lobsters. And I found it really difficult to integrate all of that to create one single sheet to try to, as the research changed, as the focus changed, if I dropped an animal, there might be something interesting. So I've found that either one single doc where I can just throw things in as I'm working, very much like Isa does, or if I'm being disciplined, things going into Zotero so that I can go back and find them later. I don't use Scrivener. I've tried looking at it on other folks' documents, but I think I'm just too haphazard for it to really make sense in my brain. And I wish I could record things long form, but also that does not work. So I find myself very frequently in the same position Alejandra was describing, with like the end notes of my memoir are 30 pages of details because Alejandra and I are both recipients of the Whiting Award for Creative Nonfiction, which is something you apply for when you've got a book contract and a nonfiction book in the works. And we won it a year apart, which is really cool, and it's so nice to meet her. But one thing that's great about it is that it's specifically money to help you finish your book to the best of its abilities to be a book in the world. And part of how I used my money was to hire a fact checker because I'm not smart enough to do it all by myself. And she saved my bacon. Her name's Esther Bergdahl. I love her. And she basically helped me create and compile the full list of materials at the end so that people could go and find it, besides making sure that I wasn't making mistakes. So anytime you have the opportunity to pay a professional to do it or to put it into your contract when you sell a book that you want to do that, or if you get the great good fortune to work with a magazine that has fact checkers to work on your nonfiction, which is very rare. And Guernica is really the only place I've ever published that had somebody on staff that was doing that incredibly vital work for my work, especially since my work is so science-based. It's just like it's essential and we just don't get it very often as writers. So we're forced to do it by ourselves. So all that said, the other thing that I think is really interesting is that having done both a very deeply researched nonfiction book and a very deeply researched fiction book, I do feel like there's this enormous permission to not remember where anything came from in my fiction. And I just listened to the audiobook of Stephen Graham Jones' book, The Buffalo Hunter, which was super, super good. And what was interesting was that his end notes were a list of so many places that he went for research, and it was very conversational, and it was not there was not a formality to it, but as a reader I so appreciated seeing his work in that way, where the acknowledgments weren't just the people who made the book happen, which my acknowledgments say that, but they were also the sources, the ideas, the rabbit holes, the personal obsessions, the like, what thing were you reading when you were 15 that made its way into the book. And it just was really inspirational to me. It's like, I want to know what little weird things us novelists are getting obsessed with.
I have one small thing to add to that where
Yeah.
I've been doing it for a long time, but I started it with the acknowledgments of Shoot the Moon and now with Wolf, and hopefully for as many other books as I get. But I have a section of thank you to the people who filled the well for this one. And it's the musicians, it's the artists, it's the actors, it's everything that has contributed creatively, either from years before or the current well of like, what am I looking at to get inspiration for this? Because like it's essential to have those in the book. The piece would not be the same without those things. So it's I haven't looked at the back of Buffalo Hunter Hunter, and now I want to, where I haven't seen anybody else doing that, but that makes me very excited that other folks are doing it too.
No, and it's so good. And I think if you ever have the chance to do or to like go on a deep dive into Large Hearted Boy, which is a website where the editor just gets people to write playlists. It's one of my favorite things to do after I fall in love with a book because that's it. Like, oh, I can see inside what you were listening to when you made this.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you all for sharing those things. And also thank you for kind of the permission to be a little messy about this as writers. Shout out to, it is a profession, fact checking. So shout out to fact checkers who are doing the real diligent work of fact checking. We're, as writers, we're maybe a little haphazard, but we're doing the best we can. But thank y'all for sharing the ways y'all go about it. We do have kind of a bustling Q&A here, so I'm going to go ahead and dig into these questions. The first question is for you, Eiren. Lindy wants to hear more about websites that let you flood the earth.
Oh gosh, you know, that's a really good question. I was trying to find it the other day because somebody asked me. I can't remember the name of the website any longer because this was something that I started doing. I began writing this book. Let's see, my kid was 5 or 6. So this is more than 13 years ago. And it was just it was basically, if you typed in climate flood map, it would come up as one of the first Google searches. Now, of course, Google's broken, so I don't know if you could find it as easily, but there are a number of searchable websites that are very generalized that will let you put in a number of meters of sea level rise. So, I mean, a basic, you know, Google search will help you find them. And I went on a little cursory research project because I'm back in this sort of I'm writing a series of books that are essentially around the same idea of like the same type of climate collapse has happened. It's set in different parts of the world, but I wanted to look at this again and I couldn't find the exact one, but I did find one. So if you a quick Google should find it for you.
Oh, thank you. How do you know what research details are important to add? I'm primarily a fantasy writer, and whenever I craft my complex magic systems, I always try to make sure that they make sense with scientific theory and physics. Yet I know readers can get bored when they're bogged down by detail after detail. Do I need to explain my entire magic system for them to enjoy and comprehend the story, or would I use a show, don't tell method? This is along with a question that I didn't get to, so I'm glad this person asked this. Um, how much detail is in that first draft, and how much gets edited out in different versions? Um, and yeah, how do you all think about this?
I, for my first book, there was a wormhole involved, and it kind of similarly to a magic system, it had to be this idea of like pick something that potentially could happen, but nobody has been able to prove yet. And that again is sort of a nice blank space where you have freedom to decide what your reality would be. And I think it's the short answer would be yes, I think show don't tell is the best way because readers really like to feel smart and capable, like we all do, obviously. So I think if you're able to give them, I think arm readers with the truth of your story and let them draw the conclusions. Like give just enough information that it makes sense to the designs of the story and it makes things happen in a logical way that doesn't feel broken or doesn't make them ask any further questions or sort of doesn't pull them out of it, but ultimately makes them more curious about it and lets them fill in those what ifs themselves. I think fantasy is an interesting theater for that I personally have not explored very much, but with the aspect of like science fiction-y blend with reality, I think there's a nice place that you get to live in as a writer where you sort of get to say this is my version of the world and I'm inviting you on into it, and I hope that you enjoy your stay, and I hope that you can sort of, you know, it's reading is an effort between the writer and the reader to make something that is exciting for the reader ultimately. So I think if you can make it fun for them to discover the process on their own and make sense of that system on their own, then that's ultimately going to be the most fun for them.
Oh, that's great advice. Thank you, Isa. Um, Here's another question that goes along again, something I didn't think I was going to have time to ask. So this is great questions, y'all. How do you get yourself out of the stage of world building and research into actually crafting the story? And Alejandra, I'll ask you this from a nonfiction standpoint. How do you get yourself out of researching and into the story? How much research versus writing is it happening simultaneously?
I feel like it's usually happening fairly simultaneously for me, or like I'll go out into the world, I'll have an experience, or I'll have kind of a spark of some kind where I'm like, this is going to be a thing that I write about. I've encountered a crunchy thing in the wild that needs to be stepped on. And that's a very violent metaphor. I don't know that I totally stand by it, but like, sometimes you see like the crunchy leaf and you're like, this is the direction I'm going in now. And that will happen, and I'll be like, okay. And I'll immediately kind of know, like, okay, there's like a couple books that I maybe want to reread because I know that they touch on this. And from there, maybe I'm looking at like a different set of sources that that author cited from the last time that I read it for something else. Or like I'm looking at the sources for the first time because the first time I just read it for fun. Um, and I'll kind of start building. It's not always like a theoretical framework, but kind of the theoretical framework around the experience that lets me say something that goes beyond the experience, if that makes sense. And so I think they're always kind of happening simultaneously. And then there's always a level of like detail work that goes in afterwards where I'm like, I have my framework where I've like read all of the other thinkers about this, but like I really need to know the layout of like this certain place and to make sure that like my memories of what this place looks like are in accordance with somebody else who could be standing there as they're reading whatever I'm writing. And so then there's always that kind of research that happens very much as I'm writing. And it's just kind of like, okay, I need to like confirm that this is the layout, or like I need to check what exactly like an immigration judge says when they're going through their whole spiel of like, it's, you know, Thursday, June 19th, 10 a.m. We're in the such and such immigration. Like there's always like those details that kind of come up as you're writing where you're like, I need the immigration judge to say something. I know he has a spiel. What is it exactly? And then you hit Google. But I think it's always sort of happening semi-simultaneously.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you. Um, And we answered this question. Erin, could you say more about where you found your fact checker? Someone's asking, how do you find reputable fact checkers, editors, agents in the writing community? I find that when I've tried to find these types of resources, I have found people who are trying to take advantage or scam writers. I'm unsure where to start when to find reputable resources.
It's really hard. I think that there's such an overwhelm of people offering services to support writers, and they can be, there's a lot of spaces where people are not scrupulous about that. So I think what I usually do is I come to my community first. I have a really robust writing and reading community in my home city, and I also have a lot of people who do the work that I do who are located in other parts of the country, who I have met by doing the same thing that I do with librarians, which is just audaciously introducing myself to people that I respect and saying, hey, I liked your last essay. This is what I'm working on. It's been, like with no expectation, but I've built many of my professional, and I think all of us could probably say that we build our professional communities through those spaces and through that generosity of spirit of trying to connect over the work that we share in common and trying to offer resources. I mean, there's a part in every class that I teach for the place that I teach, which is about being a good literary citizen. And I think that that's a really important part of your journey as a writer, is to find their community and then be able to be somebody who both takes resources and understands resources, but also gives back to other people through your own work or what you do for bringing other writers up along with you. And I think if you can do that, if you can find a trusted group, or even almost every major metropolitan city has a writers community or like a writer's loft that is doing what the work that you're doing here in Texas. And that's a place to find the people who are writing and who are thinking. And how I found my fact checker was that I follow someone I've never met and even had a conversation with, Lily Danzer, who is a really great memoirist. And I loved her book, and it was really inspirational for me in terms of writing my own book. And she happened to post, I just worked with this really great fact checker. And I didn't even know that I'd have the money to pay a fact checker. I was still in the deep weeds of my book. But I bookmarked it and I kept her name. And when I did have the money to do it, I reached out to her directly and was like, you. And I think it's the same thing with agents and editors. You know, it's about vetting them. It's about but the first step is having the people that you trust in your inner circle to be able to do that, because the people who reach out to you on the internet and the people that you just find by doing a quick Google are usually not going to be that great. And so it's about who you see presenting at conferences, and coming to things that are organized by organizations like this is that's a first step. And you can see who those people work with, and building that web of community really changes things.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you, Erin, so much. Yes, I agree. That's why we exist, the Writers League of Texas. So, and yeah, we will help anyone anywhere. So never hesitate to reach out to us here at WLT. Um, and this was asked 3 times, so I am going to ask about how you know when enough is enough. So I will ask Isa if you could also give us how you know enough to start writing.
I think there will always be more that you can do. And the answer to that, I think, is based on just what does the book want. It depends based on the story. It depends based on the stage that the story is in. I think my line for, okay, I'm done, I'm going to give it to my agent is different depending on the stage of the process that I'm in. Like I send him like really, really dirty, rough drafts before we even have an idea of how we're going to pitch it to my agent or to my editor, just to kind of get an idea of like, let's get on the same page so I can have him as that back and forth person to say like, what about this? What about this? What about this? I'm very unprecious with early work, particularly with him, because like I'm paying him to be there and do that. Like that's what he's there for. And he and I are very much on the same wavelength. So I'm lucky to have that kind of relationship with my agent. And then beyond that, I think it's just like the way that I write is very fluid. It's very move forward. My day job is in game design, so I'm very used to iteration and just like get it in. I don't care what it looks like. I don't care how it sounds. Just get it in, make sure it works. You can always clean it up later. Once it's hooked up, once the asset's in, you can just iterate on that, but get it working first. So the story function of like, I'll have big chunks of, things in a double parentheses that I can easily search for that's like, put research here, and I leave that in for weeks. And then finally, when I get to the point where I'm saying, okay, my brain space isn't taken up with just get it written, it's written. Now I can focus on the details. I do, it's kind of like sculpting. I do my rough pass and I sort of get it sketched out. And then I do another polish pass and then I do another polish pass. It's very top to end, top to end, top to end, and just making it shinier and reducing the friction on it the more and more that I go through. So it depends. It's book by book, it's stage by stage. My draft process looks very different from my revision process, looks very different from sort of the final cleanup process. But it really just ends up like it's an instinct thing too, to me. It's when I get to the point where I'm able to lose myself in my own work, I know that it's reached a point where I can sort of trust that somebody else who has no relation to this at all, who can just totally come into it cold, would potentially have a good time with it. And that's when I'm able to say, like, I'm putting the pin in it and I'm sort of sending it off and I'm going to stop thinking about it for a while. So then when it comes back to me for the next round, it'll be fresh and I'm able to kind of keep my eyes open. I always find new details to drill into whenever it comes back across my desk. And like even the finished product, I get it. It's the full hardcover. Great. I peel it open. Shit, there's something else that I could have done here. You will never be done with your books. But I think once you reach that point where you say, like, objectively, this is a whole story, that's a skill that takes some time to develop, and I'm still not 100% there. That's a lifetime of work to, keep discovering what you care about and what ends up being precious to you narratively. I think that's part of the magic of writing, but being able to say, here's the line that I've drawn in the sand. I'm done looking at this. I want outside opinion on this. I think that's something that is tough to learn, but necessary, is that as a writer, you need outside opinions. You can't just be siloed and sort of saying, this is my story. I think books of all stripes, fiction, nonfiction, whatever, they all benefit from absorbing multiple different stripes of life experience into them.
Beautifully well said. I couldn't think of a better note to end on. I think I could talk to y'all all night, but we've learned so much from you, and I'm just so, so grateful for y'all to spend your evening with us. This has been incredible. For those of you who joined us here on Zoom and via YouTube, I really, really strongly encourage you to buy and read these beautifully well-researched books. If you learned something from this conversation, you will learn a ton from their books. I believe Evan will drop it in the chat. Yeah, there it is. But yeah, thank you all so much for joining us this evening. And happy writing, everyone. Happy researching. Embrace the rabbit holes.
Thank you for having us. This was really fun.
Thank you so much, Isa. Thank you,
Thank you
Alejandra.
so much.
Erin. Good night, everyone.